Hello and welcome to the Media Club. I'm your host, Matt Deegan. In the club today, Channel 4 reveal their new drama slate. Heat Magazine's Boyd Hilton takes us through the ambitious lineup. Also on the programme, as Bradford's Year as City of Culture continues, Lisa Campbell joins us to talk about the upcoming Creative Cities Convention, where she's just taken over as director. All that plus why Netflix might be turning to podcasts for growth. The BBC provides evidence that AI can't summarise news. And in the media quiz, we look at reboots. That's all happening in this edition of the Media Club. Come on in. So welcome back to the Media Club. Before we get going into the big stories of the week, lovely to have you both here. Lisa, who's had a good media week this week? Who'd you like to add to our Media Club roles?
I'd like to add Bradford-born crime writer Dhand. He's behind the best-selling novels about the fictional Sikh detective Harry Virdee, and he's just adapted this for the screen. So his BBC One 6-part drama, first part aired on Monday. I was lucky enough actually to be at the premiere in Bradford last week in the beautiful Victorian splendour of St George's Hall, where incidentally the Labour Party formed in 1893. Anyway,
all the facts.
All the facts. Loads of beautiful Victorian architecture in Bradford. But he gave a really, inspiring personal story. He, Bradford-born, the guy from the corner shop, as he said, who became a pharmacist. He was an avid crime fiction reader and noticed, very few South Asian protagonists, so thought he'd write his own. I'd like to put him in here for his incredible resilience. It took him 10 years to get published, 9 years for the TV drama to be made. And it's great. All Bradford set. It stars Stas Nair from Game of Thrones, who's so charismatic on screen, brings real emotional depth to it. And I think at one point it would have been quite unusual to have seen a British Asian-led drama in prime time that has multifaceted characters, that explores issues like interfaith marriage. So he's a Sikh detective married to, has a Muslim wife. He's disowned by his father. It's good. It's a really, really good watch, and I recommend it. And what's also, I think, really interesting is they had an apprentice scheme that ran alongside. So they're really looking at how to try and make sustainable careers out of London. And one of the guys is a musician, and he went to work with Hans Zimmer in LA. And Amit Dhand has quite a funny story about that, because apparently Hans Zimmer, when he's writing, imagines this character of Doris in Bradford. So right. This all came from a BBC documentary that Amit was watching, where he was describing how he used to play music in northern working men's clubs in the 80s, all a bit grim. And he writes for Doris because he thinks she works hard all week and she can go to the pub or she can go to watch films and listen to his music. So he really wants to make it worth her money. So Dhand thought, I'm going to write to him. So he wrote an email to Hans Zimmer and said, so I'm writing a drama for Doris in Bradford. How about you write the music for a British-led Asian drama? So he did. 10 days later, Hans Zimmer sends the theme tune. Isn't that a nice story?
You really should reach out if you've got that idea. Also, doesn't it say, Boyd, we often talk about the sort of the transatlantic nature of streamers, that actually we've got to really double down on our own UK stories?
Yeah, completely. I watched Virdee, actually. I'm a big fan of it. Yeah, I think particularly that social commentary it has, the element it has, it's really powerful, the way it depicts the kind of religious divide within the relationship. And I think it should. And I remember seeing Hans Zimmer's name on the credits roll. I was thinking, how the hell did he get involved? So now I know. That's fascinating. We used, talking of imaginary people you aim at, so to speak. When we were creating Heat back in the day, in the late 90s, 1998, 99, we used to think of, I think her name was Susan in Norwich, who was very specifically like early 30s kind of imaginary person, and we aimed all of what we were doing at her, so to speak. So
I think it can be really helpful. I know radio stations often do that. I've been to some stations in the past where there is like a cardboard cutout, sort of slightly dog-eared one. It's like, oh, that was like 2 years ago's target audience, and they're still knocking about.
Yes.
Anyway, Boyd, who would you like to add to our Media Club list this week?
I've gone for Mike White, who is the creator, writer, producer, anything else I've missed out, of The White Lotus. He is an extraordinary figure. He writes every single episode himself of The White Lotus. So 2 seasons so far. The third one starts as we speak today on Monday on Sky.
Pretty rare for America.
Totally, almost unheard of in America, that one person, there's no writer's room. And he almost, when there was the big writing strike, people kept referring to him saying, well, you've got to have writers. And he's like, I'm not having writers, I do the whole thing on my own. And then you watch the show and it's so authored by him. And it's he has these obsessions and themes, breaking taboos, exploring illicit relationships. And if you think you've seen a lot of that in series 1 and 2, in terms of his deployment, by the way, of particularly male full frontal nudity is quite extraordinary. If anyone's seen series 1 and 2, you may remember that certain moments.
Lisa, you're a White Lotus fan?
I will be now.
Yeah.
No, I love it, actually, yeah.
Yeah, well, you ain't seen nothing yet in series 3 is all I can say. And he really what's brilliant about him is he's reached this point where he can do no wrong, and HBO love him because the show's a massive hit, a massive cultural phenomenon. They've already said you can do series 4 whenever you like. He really goes there. He's like, well, I'm going to explore whatever the hell I want to do. And I kept watching it thinking, what do those HBO execs think when they get to this moment? So yeah, it's extraordinary. I've seen 6 out of the 8 episodes of the new season, and it's phenomenal.
I mean, the casting's fantastic. Obviously, everybody wants to be in it, so
yes,
it's very
exactly.
easy to cast. But also, they're great at picking people who are really coming through. I was watching a lot of stuff recently. I was watching the Amazon Prime Numbers drama thing.
Prime Target,
yes.
Apple TV, let me correct you. Yes, there's so many streamers, it's confusing.
And Leo
Woodall
is in that. And then when I was looking him up, I was like, oh, he was the dude from White Lotus last time.
Yes. Yeah, loads of great people come from, particularly, as you say, particularly the younger cast. This time, one of the standout cast members is Amy Lou Wood, the British actress who's fantastic from Sex Education. Yeah. And she's in loads of stuff coming up. She's in Toxic Town coming up on Netflix, which is a Jack Thorne show we'll be talking about in a minute. And she's brilliant. Jason Isaacs, one of the roles of his career, is in this series of The White Lotus. It's quite extraordinary. It's just unusual to see him in such an kind of extreme role. I'm trying not to give anything away. Yeah, so you're right. Yeah, the casting is just, and it's unexpected. He casts unexpected people like Jason, I think, in key roles. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And that's out on Sky, in the UK on Sky and Now TV, I guess.
Exactly.
Monday,
the 17th, I think it is, as we speak today.
There's loads of great TV at the moment. I think there's some brilliant shows on. And speaking of which, Channel 4 had some announcements. They've just announced their drama slate. The second announcement by a relatively new drama commissioner, Ollie Madden. Boyd, what have they announced?
Well, they've lined up a kind of a mix of, I would say, big star names when it comes to creative. So Jack Thorne, I think, is probably the headline who I was just talking about. He's got a show coming up on Netflix in a few weeks' time with Amy Lou Wood called Toxic Town, which is based on a true story. I think he's kind of specialised a little. Well, he adapted his dark material, so he's incredibly talented when it comes to creating shows based on complicated stories, I think. But he also does a lot of based on reality stories as well, like Toxic Town coming up. This is being billed as his first love story, and it's all about the love between a nun and a Catholic priest. I'm on board already with that description. It's called Falling, and I just like the idea of Jack. I mean, it's not like he needs any work because he's one of the most prolific writers in the world.
Yeah, he's also got a Netflix series, hasn't he, with Stephen Graham, Adolescence.
Exactly, yes, extraordinary. So he's a busy man. He likes to keep himself busy, but he's brilliant. He's an absolute genius. So, and I think it's exciting that he's doing this kind of personal story about faith and relationships, and it's exciting that it's not a true story in a way, that it's completely come from his own imagination. It's not a remake or a reboot or an adaptation.
It'll be fascinating to see how he approaches a love story, given that it's something he's never done before. But I guess knowing Jack Thorne, it will be subversive and witty and moving and all of that. So yeah, it sounds great. I'm very excited about that. Then they've got a thing called The Rachel Incident, which is adapted from a novel of the same name. The most exciting thing about this is it's being adapted by Jen Statsky, who co-created Hacks. Hacks is like one of the best shows of recent years. Famously took a long time to come to this country, the most recent series. It's now all on Sky /Now, thankfully. But it's a brilliant show. That's exciting. Pierre is a show co-written by John Donnelly and playwright Roy Williams. And that's stars David Harewood. That looks very interesting as a duty solicitor.
You've got, I love Daisy Haggard. Like, if you want talking
me
about,
too.
fantastic talent. She did Back to Life for the BBC, and now she's doing a show called Maya, a dark comedy about witness protection. Now, I think she specialises in dark comedy because Back to Life was really.
Is this
really
UK witness protection?
I think so.
It
I
is,
believe
yeah,
so. Yeah, UK
yeah.
witness protection.
Yeah.
And you've got the return of the Undeclared War. I don't know if you remember the Undeclared War. This was the Simon Pegg,
Yeah, so that's been
Peter Kosminski.
about 3 years ago.
Yeah, it was like a cyber thriller.
Right.
And I remember I hosted the Q&A, the launch kind of Q&A, and I remember the thing that etched to my memory is Peter Kosminski is a good talker, right, about his stuff. I asked him one question. I'm pretty sure it was 25 minutes before I got to Simon Pegg to ask him the next question. But I really enjoyed that show, and I kind of forgot that they recommissioned it. I think they recommissioned it very soon after it went out. I think it did pretty well for Channel 4. So I'm excited to see that back.
You've also got A Woman of Substance,
Yes.
which I'm really excited about. So that's obviously the Barbara Taylor Bradford novels. And I mean, I remember reading that. I don't know how old I was, but it, had such an impact, that kind of, revenge story and rags to riches tale. So, the housemaid who becomes the, richest woman. And I didn't realise it was, 40 years that it was made for Channel 4 and was their most successful drama at the time. So I think it'll be fascinating to see how they bring that back to life.
Success.
They're sort of saying it's, it feels really relevant today because you think, maybe why bring that back? But it's, the sort of comment made about the rising manosphere.
Yes.
And sort of more challenges around social mobility that, in a negative way. So kind of searingly relevant, really.
Well, Lisa, there's quite a lot of coming out of drama. I think they've doubled their drama budget. Is it going to be difficult for them to pay for it, do you think?
Well, that's a good question. I think everyone is talking about how do you fund shows, whether it's scripted or unscripted. I think in scripted particularly, America has just become increasingly challenging. There aren't the same co-productions. There's a concern that it might become more protectionist under Donald Trump. And so people are having to think differently about pre-sales for drama, looking at other territories like Europe. And, then there's screen agency funding, which really differs. It's almost a postcode lottery, certainly in England. Having said that, Channel 4 have just announced they're going to be ring-fencing 35 million over the next few years for the nations. So Scotland, Ireland and Wales will all benefit from that. But yeah, what about England is a question there.
Yeah, Boyd, do you think they can take on the streamers with these shows?
I think to an extent they can, or at least they have to try. And I think the good thing about this announcement is the doubling of the budget and the number of commissions, because I do think it's felt a bit thin on the ground, Channel 4 original drama. And in recent years, I mean, there have been some good ones. The Gathering last year was I think a great example of exactly what Channel 4 should be doing with a drama about young people and various issues incorporated into a really compelling story. And you had Brian and Maggie recently with Steve Coogan, the story of Brian Ward and Maggie Thatcher. So they've done bits and pieces, but it hasn't felt like it's been a priority, to say the least. And they've done quite a lot of shows adapted from their Water Presents, international things. They've done UK English language versions of those, which seems a fairly kind of straightforward thing for them to do. And a lot of them have been hits. But the fact that they're going for original new commissions, some of them might be the Woman of Substance, is obviously a new version of that story. But the fact they're investing in drama, I think, is really important, because often channels are defined by dramas, drama, scripted drama and comedy particularly, and then it's all very well to have wall-to-wall factual entertainment. That's great, and those shows will break out and be huge hits. But I think when you think of long-term, you think of you think of shows that define channels, and you think of drama. I
was talking to Ian Katz a little while ago, and I think they definitely saw drama as a way to kind of pull people into the streaming service as well, and try and make that more of a destination. I mean, I'm not saying it's a second division streamer, because it has a lot of great content on, but it's hard for the PSBs to cut through sometimes with their material.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, dramas resonate. They're the things people talk about. I think Boyd's absolutely right. It really gives a sense of identity to a channel. So, hopefully they will cut through with some of this stuff. And we see, the performance of British content on the streamers. Obviously last year, Ted Sarandon was talking about the top 5 or 6 shows on Netflix were all British made. So there is a huge global appetite for our content as well. And really Channel 4 should be absolutely, front and centre of that.
I always look, Boyd, at the top 10 on Netflix.
Same, yeah.
What's showing up, and WWE suddenly in there. They're quite a lot. It's doing well for them. But oddly, like old ITV dramas, you often see like, and you think, is that a new one? And you look at the date and it's like 2007 or something.
Oh, absolutely. It's very funny because my mum watches a lot of stuff on Netflix. She's always asking me for recommendations, and she just looks around, clicks on a show. If it's kind of high up in the menu, in her menu, she'll look on it and she'll say, "Oh, you never told me about this show." I was like, "That's because it was made 20 years ago." It happens a lot. Yeah, completely unexpected films as well in their film menu. Suddenly, they'll buy something from 2003, and it will become the most watched thing of that week. It is a fascinating situation with Netflix.
Okay, following Apple's somewhat disastrous introduction of news AI summaries, the BBC's conducted a study and found that all of the major AI chatbots are currently unable to accurately summarise the news. Lisa, do you know what the BBC were doing with this?
Yes, so for a month, they allowed the chatbots, so ChatGPT, Copilot, Perplexity, to have access to its site, which it doesn't normally allow that access. Okay. So this was an experiment to see how would these AI assistants summarize news content. Guess what? Not very well. So 51% were deemed to be having significant issues. So essentially, they asked 100 questions and then the answers were assessed by specialist journalists at the BBC, for things like accuracy, impartiality. And, some of it was quite troubling, really. It's things like advising that the NHS doesn't advise the use of vapes to give up cigarettes, when actually it has a swap and stop programme. So it does suggest that's a viable method. The, tragic story of the French rape victim, it suggested that she had a blackout or some sort of memory loss and suddenly realised that these crimes had been committed when it was the police who showed her the video evidence. I think it's just troubling given, as you've spoken about on this podcast, the rise of mis and disinformation. We're just seeing this exponential rise. It is so overwhelmingly difficult for people to just know what to trust anymore.
But also, you sort of when I saw this story, I was surprised how bad it was. Like I would of course expect it to get things wrong, and we're not really there yet. But like 50% seemed really poor.
I think this is the problem. People expect there to be more accuracy in this, and there just isn't. And it's about how you control it. The tech giants have the power here, and it's, if you think about, if people no longer know what to trust and what to believe, they just stop believing anything. Yes. And I think that's so worrying, for the future of, our democracy. But also if you think about COVID and how important trusted public health information was, and the role that the public service broadcasters played during that time was absolutely vital. If you've got chatbots summarising that information, it could be really dangerous. And, when you're talking about something like public health, and God forbid we ever get something like COVID again. So I think the repercussions are enormous. It's actually something that Deborah Turness, the chief of BBC News, really highlighted. So I think it's just another example, really, of this world of confusion.
I mean, also it's interesting about kind of control. I mean, BBC don't allow their material to be spidered or supposedly spidered by the services, though they probably do anyway. But actually looking at it and seeing where the control lies for media companies that produce this content, I think becomes quite important. I think it's good that the BBC have identified this. I mean, you work for a massive magazine publisher and radio broadcaster. Do you worry about them getting into all of your reviews? Can there be virtual Boyd?
I do worry about it, and they're constantly being told not to worry about it. But of course, the more you're told not to worry about it, the more you worry about it, in my experience. But it's interesting because I use, if you're a journalist who interviews a lot of people, I interview a lot of people. Most weeks I'm interviewing someone or other. You record it and everyone says, "Oh, can't it just be transcribed by AI?" There is AI. There are AI bot transcription services, and I do use one of them particularly. But oh my God, it's so inaccurate. You have to go through the whole thing. It takes almost as long to double check it as it would be if you just transcribed it yourself. And I was transcribing an interview the other day actually using this AI, and the answer that the person I was interviewing gave was 100% the opposite of what was in the transcription. And people do say, "Oh no, it's fine. The transcription will work perfectly." It's completely at fault constantly. So it's just one of the things you just got to be really careful with. And I'm not sure if that'll ever change. I'm not sure. I think you almost have to have the human double checking.
Yeah, thank God you need the humans at the end of it. But I think for newsrooms, it's really challenging. I think there are some great AI tools, as Boyd said, that really help. Well, sometimes they help speed up a transcription, or for subtitling or for putting things into different languages. It can be quite useful. Even going through massive volumes of data, if you're doing an investigation, of course you need a brilliant investigations team at the heart of all of that. But sifting through that sort of data can really help. But you can now, with so much disinformation out there, the newsroom could spend all their time verifying content, figuring out what's true, what isn't. Where's the room for the original journalism? It's an absolute minefield for already challenged, resource-wise newsrooms. It really is just another problem.
I'm just interested, will it get better? Because previously, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, Wikipedia, it'd be like, oh, don't use Wikipedia because anybody can do that. It's not very good. Whereas now, the accuracy of Wikipedia, even created by lots of humans, everything's fixed pretty much instantly. It's become a really great source of usage, and that shift has changed. Don't you think we'll maybe see the same thing with AI? Do you think there'll be you'll have AI that's only trained on good content?
Another minefield. I mean, the whole copyright situation, and obviously the government is looking at that, and the creative industry, and lots of high-profile writers, actors, everyone is really sort of up in arms about all of that. So, access to content, and what we have laws, already existing. So why can we not just sort of toughen our copyright framework and ensure, that work is protected properly? I mean, in response to the chatbot story, a lot of the tech giants didn't even respond when asked by the BBC. I think OpenAI came back and said, they're making improvements to search all the time. They're adding inline citations and sources, but clearly there's a long way to go.
More to be done. Okay, a report from Business Insider suggests Netflix might start hosting video podcasts. Video podcasts, you say? I could happily sign up to a Netflix deal. Boyd, is this YouTube envy by Netflix? Have they seen some of these shows do really well, the Joe Rogans of the world, and think, let's get them on? Maybe,
yeah. But I mean, why wouldn't you, if you were Netflix, invest in podcasts? Podcasts, I mean, Joe Rogan is the obvious example. Incredibly powerful, hugely successful. You can make millions and millions out of them. Particularly, it seems in America, there's a whole kind of world of quite political, often quite right-wing in inverted commas.
Good old manosphere.
The manosphere. 3 hours long, podcast interviews, etc. And why wouldn't Netflix? I mean, it's cheap. You could film this. Well, you are filming this right now. The podcast that I do for Bauer Pilot TV is we film it as well. It goes on YouTube. You just have to do that now. And Netflix would have access to some pretty impressive talent, I think. And if they can get them in a room and film them and make millions out of it, why the hell wouldn't they?
So the Joe Rogan example is a really significant one. His interview with Donald Trump, 3 hours long, as Boyd said, but got 20 million views on YouTube in 20 hours, in the first 20 hours. I think it's a really interesting one for Netflix. It does make sense. Podcasts are obviously cheaper to make than scripted and big feature docs.
Is that a worry for TV production companies who are used to creating something else that takes a lot more resource, takes a lot more people, employs a lot more people, and it's relatively easy to film a chat like this, and the preparation for that is much less than if you're making a traditional doc or a traditional series.
I mean, not necessarily. I don't think it's really either or. I think it's everyone is looking at their IP and how can you exploit that to the max. So the podcast becomes a live tour where you can make loads of money. It can become a drama, as we saw with Sweet Bobby on Netflix. So I think there are examples where actually it's a really good way, especially with emerging talent. So Netflix might also look at that. Yes, it's got the funds to go for the big names. Some of the big names are already signed up elsewhere and have exclusive deals, like Alex Cooper, Call Her Daddy, which is, I think, the most listened to by women on Spotify. So there's people like that already tied up, but there's clearly others who would happily take the Netflix dollar. But the creator's story, clearly a massive success for YouTube. I think they've got 400 million hours of YouTube podcast content. So,
and they're not really paying a penny for it.
No.
Because the creators sort of self-monetize. Obviously, they've created a way for them to be
monetize,
paid. But no big advances. They don't need to do big advances for YouTube. Boyd, when you're going to interview TV and film stars, previously you're competing against TV shows and newspapers and mags. Have you got a load of YouTubers and podcasters in that list waiting to go into that hotel room?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, we are an example of a podcast that and you get brilliant access these days. We've had some incredible people on our podcast, and I think that people don't make the differentiation anymore. In fact, a lot of the time they know they can get much better access or much bigger audience going to a podcast than they're going into good old fashioned print media. So that's definitely the way forward. But I just think it's interesting, isn't it, that these shows that are 3 hours long, 2 hours long, etc. I remember in the heyday of when podcasts first started being told, the optimum time is 36 minutes. Don't you dare go over 36 minutes. Meanwhile, the biggest one in the world is at least 3 hours. And you feel shortchanged almost if Joe Rogan only gives you 2.5, So it's we're also told that people's attention span is disappearing and we're only interested in 30-second. I think that cliche, that stereotype has been exploded by the popularity of extremely long form podcasts.
I think it shows a crossover with everything. So I was talking to someone about Joe Rogan, and if you have more of a manual job where you would traditionally listen to the radio all day on in the background, well, actually, why wouldn't you listen to a 3-hour podcast?
Right.
Same sort of thing about the environment. And so you've got sort of podcasts aping a sort of radio distribution method, and then you've now got YouTube taking a video sort of user-generated content thing. I think I'm interested with Netflix on, are they about a curated group of content like they are at the moment, or do they want to open it up a bit more like YouTube? Probably not entirely, but should you let shows upload themselves and there's sort of the best ones win?
Yeah, I suppose there's a number of different models that they could take. I mean, they could license, big names already. They could show that exclusively for a period and then it could go onto other platforms. They could do an ad-supported model. They could do ad-free premium. They could have that creator emerging talent environment. I think ultimately they know they need to keep people on the platform for longer and get more subscribers. So the more people are engaging with content, the better. So the more content they can have, and especially low production, cheaper content, the better. But also podcasts you have an incredibly loyal audience for podcasts, and that's probably something else that they're thinking about. You want
subscriber retention.
Exactly, yeah. And it's also interesting the kind of topics that resonate. Like Boyd was saying, politics. You wouldn't think that people are deep diving 3 hours into politics. The Joe Rogan Trump one has now been knocked off the top spot on Apple by The Rosary in a Year.
Oh yes,
so this apparently will change the way you pray. Absolutely huge. So religion and politics. Who said don't talk about them?
There's a market for everything. The Night Agent or the Media Club, I know what I'd choose on Netflix. When we come back, more from the Media Club in the quiz. Also have a look at this year's Creative Cities Convention. Don't go anywhere.
Hello Media Club listeners, Patrick here from Podcast Discovery, the podcast marketing company, where this week we've been thinking about the myths of podcasting. Do you need a celeb host to make it big? Will organic growth just happen if the content is good enough? And do you really need a video strategy, or will your podcast only work in audio? To debunk those myths or speak to us about your podcast marketing, head to podcastdiscovery.com. That's podcastdiscovery.com.
More and more people are choosing to consume their podcasts not just as listeners, but as viewers too. So after 10 years making this show, we knew it was time to take the plunge and transform our podcast into a full-on video experience. Now we record our show at Podshop Studios. With a professional setup and expert support, Podshop make it easy to create high-quality video content that elevates your podcast and reaches more people. And for a limited time, enjoy 25% off your first booking at Podshop Studios with the code Media Club. Visit podshoponline.co.uk to book and take your podcast to the next level. Don't miss out. Grab this chance today. Welcome back. Here's what we've been talking about in the Media Club this week. News UK has taken full control of Octave, the internet advertising platform they started as a joint venture with Bauer Media. They bought out their commercial rivals after working together for 5 years. We expect it so that both can kind of push ahead with their own individual streaming plans. The Observer may be losing a third of its staff to voluntary redundancy. That's according to the Press Gazette. We shouldn't be surprised given the terms of voluntary scheme are reported to be £120,000 per person, plus a notice period. And TV and radio indies met for the first time on Wednesday at a joint networking event organised by Pact and Audio UK. The Media Club was there and observed a few trends. TV producers looking to test new IP on smaller budgets and audio companies looking for TV selling power. Maybe they should all have a big swap. Right, our guests are back with us. Lisa, you're on the secondment from ITN up to Bradford for this year's Creative Cities Convention. How's it going?
It's going really well, actually. The city is really buzzing. They've really regenerated the centre. It's looking amazing. And there's such an excitement, not just about the conference, but the rest of the year, obviously, the City of Culture. We've got 2 days in May, 7th and 8th of May, of debate sessions, screenings. We're actually opening the first night with a screening, a preview screening of the Bradford City Stadium fire.
Okay.
Obviously, a really powerful story, but it's also really celebrates the kind of community spirit and unity and resilience of the city, and clearly it had such an impact nationally as well. We've got Tim Davey in conversation with Tracy Braben, West Yorkshire Mayor. So the BBC DG has spoken a lot about the importance of production in the nations and regions, which is what Creative Cities Convention is all about. It's the only conference for people working in film, TV, digital content outside of London. It's in a different city every year, and we thought it would be great to have the Bradford City of Culture backdrop. And I think it's such a opportune time, actually, for a convention like this. It's so aligned with government thinking, the industrial strategy, growth of the creative industries. And Lisa Nandy has been particularly passionate about her support for sustainable regional production. She gave quite a tough talk to broadcast bosses at the Royal Television Society convention last year. She said, we should feel shame that our industry is one of the most centralised, exclusive industries in the UK. So, we're all about showcasing the talent locally across the UK. How do we better serve and represent the nation? And having those crucial conversations around how do we have these sustainable regional production hubs.
And also there's a lot of conversations in there about production companies like opening regional offices, but perhaps not coming from those areas directly. Is it something those sort of native production companies are quite keen to shout about their own successes and challenges?
Yeah, well, brass plating, as they call it, has been going on for years and years and years. It's not a new thing. And I think people want to attract the inward investment. So a series being made or a programme being made in a region clearly has an impact if you're using local crew. And that kind of thing. But it's about, you need the returning series to make this, have the long-term sustainability. And I think that's the big challenge. And as Lisa Nandy said as well, the talent is there, the opportunity isn't there. And how do we just make it a fairer place? I mean, I talk to people in the TV industry all the time. We say, would we have left our hometowns if we could have stayed where we were to have a media career? It just wasn't an option.
There's always the challenge that it attracts very similar people. If you need to live in a city or support yourself in a city when you're not earning much money. It doesn't make a TV sector or a screen sector that represents the country as a whole.
No, absolutely. And it, and it has an impact on the kind of stories being told. And, look at A.A. Dhand, as I said, would that be coming to the screen if it wasn't Bradford City of Culture, if there wasn't that emphasis on supporting that talent that don't have a platform to bring these kind of stories to a broader audience? I think it's really difficult now, even more. I mean, back then we could just about afford to live in a grotty flat. We'd try and smooth our accents a bit, whatever. I don't know if you have to do that to the same extent, but the rent in London is just completely unaffordable for so many people. But then in the regions, you've had a lack of investment, poor infrastructure, the cost of living crisis goes on. So it's a really challenging time, which all sounds very depressing, and we're not going to be depressing. Yeah. I think it's, very much about, let's be optimistic. Where is the growth? How can people pivot into different, areas? Can we look at digital content and all of the opportunities there, podcasts and vodcasts. It's really interesting. The sort of old structures crumbling mean that there's new opportunity for so many more people. And, we're going to look at things like the impact of the soaps, which for decades have had such an important role in leading the way on the talent pipeline. I mean, look at Sarah Lancashire, Sally Wainwright, Russell T Davies, all of the people that have come from, the North particularly, and really thrived. So I think, as, Samir Shah said last year of the BBC, you shouldn't have to leave to succeed.
So what are the dates?
May 7th and 8th.
And people can get tickets where?
On the Creative Cities Convention website.
Lovely. Give it a search and sign up now. And Boyd, what's keeping you busy at the moment?
Well, it's got our podcast, our weekly podcast. In fact, twice weekly podcast, because you can subscribe and you get extra content. It's all the rage these days, Matt. Pilot TV, that is. And yesterday I interviewed Jason Isaacs last week about the White Lotus, his role in the White Lotus. He was on very good form. Yesterday I interviewed Chris O'Dowd and Christina Hendricks, who are in this new show that Chris has written and created for Sky called Small Town Big Story, which is kind of like, how in Game of Thrones, where this huge Hollywood production invaded small towns in Northern Ireland, which is where a lot of it was filmed. So he's taken that idea, what would it be like for the people living in a small village in Ireland to suddenly have this massive, huge Hollywood production arrive? And Christina Hendricks plays the kind of lead producer who's got issues as to why she's going back to this small town. But you said earlier how there's loads of great TV at the moment. I think it's we're only in February, and already it feels like there's 3 or 4, 5 or 6 really, really good new scripted shows. What's
out now that's available that people should be watching if they're not?
Well, Big Boys, and Jack Rook's Channel 4 comedy. I say comedy, it's incredibly moving and emotional, this final series. Very autobiographical. That's airing in double bills on Sunday night at the moment. I think the last 2 will be kind of next weekend. But it's also all on, as everything has to be these days, box setted on Channel 4's streaming service. And I watched the whole thing in one go pretty much, and it is an absolutely brilliant piece of work. I think it will go down as one of the great kind of half-hour comedy shows, ostensibly, of the time. And yet it's spectacularly emotionally devastating as well. I want everyone. But I really want to see what Jack does next, because this is such a personal story for him in all kinds of ways. It's about the loss of his father, it's about his best friend, it's about sexuality, etc. But next I think he'll do something that's not so autobiographical, and he's such a talent. And as you were talking about, he's a working class, guy. Went to university, met his friends. His story is a kind of heartwarming and inspirational one, where just his talent alone and his idea for this show got him the year of Channel 4 who commissioned it, and they deserve kudos as well for doing that. So that's the show at the moment. I think there's also on BBC for scheduling nerds at the moment, we've got on Wednesday nights on BBC One, Am I Being Unreasonable, and Amandaland, the Motherland spin-off. And as far as I'm aware, Wednesday night BBC One has not been a hotbed of sitcoms, but suddenly they put these 2 really good quality shows there, and I think they're kind of doing okay, and I just think that's exciting from a scheduling nerdy point of view, that they suddenly put them on a Wednesday night, and we're used to them being on a Friday night. For Friday night's been BBC One comedy night for years and years and years.
Yeah, the role of scheduling is shifting a little bit, isn't it? I mean, how it sort of dovetails with streaming, and obviously Traitors came up with a slightly different take on that, to you want to drive excitement and still do quite well on linear and mix it all together.
I think they're being more ambitious. I think maybe knowing that, because they're always cannibalising their own things anyway. They're always saying, watch this if you want, as a box set on iPlayer or ITVX or whatever, and at the same time we're showing it live if you like. There's a show called Dope Girls coming up, which is going to be on a Saturday night on BBC One, like 9:25, I think, off the top of my head. And this is from Jane Tranter's company, Bad Wolf, and it's a really daring, bold, quite raunchy story of post-World War One shenanigans in Soho, and it just feels this is a Saturday night show. It doesn't feel like a Saturday night show, but that's what good luck to them. That's what BBC's doing. Of course, Jane Tranter just announced this week as the new advisory chair on the Edinburgh TV Festival. You may have heard of it.
Yeah, she's a great booking.
So she's having. She could have been in the media club.
Well, I'd her in next week.
There you go. Yeah. She's having a great time. But I think Bad Wolf is an example of a production company that does really ambitious, bold shows, and the fact that BBC is putting the show out on Saturday night, I think, is exciting in itself. I've seen it and it's really good.
Don't go anywhere. The media quiz is next. Okay, welcome back. Just enough time for the media quiz. Let's see how much attention you've been paying to the media this week. And this week's quiz is entitled Renew, Reboot or Revenge? 3 bits of content returning to our devices soon. You tell me if they can be loosely defined, and it's a Mac quiz, so it's loosely defined, as a renewal by a broadcaster, a reboot, or revenge, like a defection somewhere else.
And I'm up against the TV boffin of all time. That's really unfair here.
You say that, but
there's a bit of everything here. You should buzz in with your name if you know the answer. So Boyd, you will say
Boyd.
And Lisa, you will say
Lisa.
Let's play Renew, Reboot or Revenge. Okay, question number 1. Buzz in. Big Mood on Channel 4.
Boyd.
Lisa.
Boyd.
Renew, that is the second series of the Nicola Coughlan starring comedy.
Good show to...
Really good show.
Yeah.
Really good show. Very mental health aware show. Very interesting,
Yeah. Brilliant dynamic with those two as well, isn't it?
Lydia West, yeah.
Brilliant actress. Okay, question number 2. How do you cope podcast on Wondery?
Oh, is that the one that's...
excuse me?
Oh, sorry. My name is Lisa. Lisa.
Remember the format. That's it.
That's the BBC...
is this a renew, a reboot or revenge?
It's... I guess, I don't know, is it a reboot? It's moving from the BBC to Wondery, so I don't know, maybe they will change the format. Possibly not.
I'm saying revenge.
Yeah,
I think producer Matt's saying revenge.
Oh, God, sorry, of course. Yeah.
Sort of
revenge. Yeah.
So this is an Audio Always show that's moved from BBC Sounds to Wondery. I mean, it's interesting sort of kind of podcast transfers. Obviously, sometimes there's like big money transfers. Others just commissioning changes and people's minds change. And
I think it's quite unusual, isn't it? I don't know that happens too often.
Yeah, I think it's something we probably see more of.
I often think it's weird that certain podcasts are on the BBC. I think sometimes I think, why is this thing that's very commercial, big star? They kind of gather big stars, they give them a producer or whatever, and they create a podcast which ends up being quite huge. But why should it be the BBC that does? I don't know. It seems slightly.
I think there is an interesting bit about whether, if a show has been successful, and this one sort of came from the guys who do a 5 Live show, and it sort of became something else, that it's sort of okay, they birthed it and then it moves on somewhere else to make some money or do all right.
Like the Lily Allen Mikita Oliver, which I love, it's a brilliant podcast. Them two, swearing and talking about their personal lives, it's brilliant. But why is that on the BBC? That seems incongruous to me. Should be on it should be on a Wondery or something like that.
Got to attract people to BBC Sounds, got to get them through the door.
Yeah, but there's also issues with the licence fee for paying for that. I don't know. It makes me feel slightly uneasy, I have to say.
Okay, question number 3. Harry Potter on HBO Max. Reboot, revenge...
Boyd. Reboot.
Yes.
This is... every day there's a different who is being cast story in the Harry Potter, the huge Harry Potter project that's coming up, where they're going to readapt every single novel in more detail than the films could have done. Bless them.
I mean, you sort of look at it and go, surely no-brainer, massive success. But that's a dangerous position to be in.
And yet, it probably will be. I mean, you think of the Lord of the Rings spin-off. Lord of the Rings, the Rings of the Lord, I call it. The Rings of Power, I think it's actually called. Which is allegedly the most expensive TV show ever per episode. And I think it has done pretty well for Prime Video. Well enough for them to carry on doing it, I think.
Yeah, well, it's got a real sort of... The hardcore fans love it, don't they?
Yeah.
They really... That fan base is enormous, yeah.
Yeah, and despite all the controversies, whatever you want to say, Harry Potter is still an enormous... I would say even more popular, obviously with younger people, than the Lord of the Rings and the Tolkien stuff. So it does feel like a bit of a no-brainer. And if they're going to... So later I saw John Lithgow rumoured to be playing Dumbledore, I think. I saw that. So, it's an opportunity to cast some brilliant people in the older roles and find some stars to play the younger characters.
Yeah. Out sort of January, February time next year, they say?
That's what they're saying, yeah, interesting, yeah. I mean,
okay, I think Boyd, you win there, 2-1.
Thanks.
You get to, as a special prize, investigate whether we should be concentrating on renewing, rebooting or revenge for the show next time.
Oh, just always revenge, sure.
Always revenge, always revenge. Thank you to you both. Great to have you here. Check out the Pilot TV podcast, obviously Heat Magazine and the convention, which you can get tickets for now. And thank you to you for joining us as well. My name is Matt Deegan. This is a Rethink production with video support from Podcast Discovery. The producer was Matt Hill. We would love you to sign up to our mailing list at themediaclub.com. It's entirely free to do so, but you get a special update from us every week. That's at themediaclub.com. Speaking of next week, I'll see you then.